The dust swirled around Quentin Harper's boots as he stood at the edge of the market square in Wheatland, Wyoming, watching something that made his stomach turn with a mixture of rage and helplessness that he had never quite felt before in all his 32 years. The year was 1867, and the world was still finding its footing after the war had torn the country apart, leaving scars deeper than any battlefield wound. The sun beat down mercilessly on the wooden platform where women stood in a line, their eyes downcast, their hands bound with rope, while men circled them like vultures assessing carrion. This was not a slave auction, not officially, because the war had ended that particular evil, but desperation had bred new forms of bondage. These were women sold into indenture, their contracts purchased by men who wanted wives, workers, or worse, and the law looked the other way because nobody quite knew what to do with all the displaced souls wandering the territories. Quentin had come to town for supplies, nothing more. His ranch sat 15 miles northeast of Wheatland, a modest spread where he raised cattle and horses with the help of 2 hired hands. He had fought in the war on the Union side, seen things that still woke him in the night, and come west to find some measure of peace in the wide open spaces where a man could work himself to exhaustion and fall asleep too tired to dream. He had not come looking for a wife, had not come looking for trouble, but sometimes trouble found you anyway. The auctioneer was a portly man with sweat stains spreading across his shirt despite the early hour. His voice carried across the square with practiced ease, calling out the merits of each woman as though they were livestock. Quentin watched as one by one they were purchased, led away by men whose eyes held nothing but possession. He told himself to walk away, to get his supplies and ride back to the ranch, but his feet remained rooted to the spot. Then she stepped onto the platform, and something shifted in his chest. She was the last woman, and she held her head higher than the others had. Her dark hair hung in tangled waves past her shoulders, and even from a distance, Quentin could see the defiance burning in her eyes. She wore a simple dress that had once been blue but had faded to the color of a winter sky, and her hands, though bound, clenched into fists at her sides. The auctioneer grabbed her arm roughly, pulling her forward, and she jerked away from him with such force that several men in the crowd laughed. "This one's got spirit," the auctioneer announced, his grin showing tobacco-stained teeth. "Might need a firm hand, but she'll be worth the trouble." Name's Katherine Calloway, age 24, came west with a wagon train that got hit by Cheyenne raiders near Fort Laramie. Lost everything, including her kin. Contracts for 7 years of service, but a man could make it permanent if he wanted. Catherine's eyes swept the crowd, and for just a moment, they locked with Quentin's. He saw fear there, carefully hidden beneath layers of fury and determination, and he saw something else too, something that reminded him of a wild horse he had once tried to break. The horse had nearly killed him twice before he realized that some creatures were not meant to be broken, only respected. The bidding started low. Most of the men who might have wanted a woman had already made their purchases, and those who remained seemed put off by Catherine's obvious lack of submission. The auctioneer's voice grew increasingly frustrated as the bids crawled upward with painful slowness. Quentin watched as a man near the front, a rancher named Jeremiah Pike, who was known for his cruelty to both animals and the Chinese workers he employed, raised his hand with a grin that made Quentin's blood run cold. He did not think about it, did not plan it, did not consider the consequences. His hand went up, and his voice cut through the square with the same authority he used when managing his ranch hands. $500. The crowd went silent. The auctioneer's eyes widened. Pike turned to stare at him with undisguised hostility. $500 was more than twice what any other woman had sold for, more than most men in the territory made in 6 months. Quentin felt every eye on him, but he kept his gaze fixed on Katherine. Her expression had shifted from defiance to confusion, her dark eyes searching his face as though trying to understand what kind of man would pay such a sum. "500 going once," the auctioneer said, recovering quickly from his surprise. He looked at Pike, giving him a chance to counter, but Pike just spat in the dirt and stalked away. "Going twice. Sold to the gentleman in the black hat." Quentin moved through the crowd, reaching into his coat for the roll of bills he kept for emergencies. His hands were steady as he counted out the money, though his heart hammered against his ribs. The auctioneer took the cash with greedy fingers, then produced a piece of paper from his coat. "Bill of sale," he said, handing it to Quentin along with a small key. "Says she's yours for 7 years, or permanent if you want to make it legal. Keys for the bonds." Quentin took both items without a word. He climbed the steps to the platform where Katherine stood watching him with those fierce, frightened eyes. Up close, he could see the bruises on her wrists where the rope had rubbed the skin raw, could see the way her body trembled despite her efforts to stand tall. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with softness, all sharp edges and barely contained fury. He held up the key. "I am going to unlock these," he said quietly, speaking only to her. "Then we are going to walk to the general store, get some supplies, and ride out to my ranch. I need you to trust me for that long. Can you do that?" Katherine's jaw clenched. "I do not have much choice, do I?" "No," Quentin admitted, "but I am asking anyway." Something flickered in her expression, surprise perhaps, at being asked rather than commanded. She gave a single, sharp nod. Quentin unlocked the bonds, and Katherine immediately brought her hands forward, rubbing at the angry red marks on her wrists. He wanted to say something, to offer some kind of comfort, but the platform was not the place. Too many eyes still watched them with curiosity and speculation. They walked to the general store in silence. Quentin was aware of Katherine beside him, of the way she moved with a kind of coiled readiness, as though prepared to bolt or fight at any moment. He took his time in the store, gathering flour, sugar, coffee, salt pork, and other necessities while Katherine stood near the door. The storekeeper, an older man named Henderson, gave them both curious looks but knew better than to ask questions. When they emerged back into the sunlight, Quentin led Katherine to where his horse waited, a sturdy bay gelding named Ash. He had tied a pack mule next to the horse that morning, and he loaded the supplies onto the mule's back with practiced efficiency. Katherine watched him work, her expression unreadable. "You can ride?" Quentin asked. "Yes." "Good, we will stop at the livery and get you a horse. You will need one at the ranch anyway." Katherine's eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because walking everywhere would be damned inconvenient," Quentin said. He swung up onto Ash and offered his hand down to her. "Come on. You can ride with me to the livery." She hesitated for a long moment before accepting his hand. Her palm was rough with calluses, the hand of someone who had worked hard. Quentin pulled her up behind him, and she settled onto Ash's back with the easy grace of someone who had indeed spent time on horses. Her hands rested lightly on his waist, barely touching, and he could feel the tension in her body. The livery was at the edge of town, a weathered building that smelled of hay and horses. The owner, a bow-legged man named Sam, greeted Quentin with a nod and a curious glance at Katherine. "Need to buy a horse," Quentin said. "Something steady but with some spirit. A mare if you have one." Sam scratched his chin. "Got a chestnut mare, came in last week. Pretty thing, good conformation. A little green, but she has a good temperament. Owner couldn't pay his bills, so I took her as payment. Let me see her." Sam led them to a stall where a chestnut mare stood munching hay. She was indeed pretty, with a white blaze down her face and intelligent eyes. Katherine moved forward without being asked, extending her hand to let the mare sniff her. The horse whuffed softly, and Katherine ran her hand down the mare's neck with sure strokes. "She is beautiful," Katherine said softly, and for the first time there was something other than wariness in her voice. "She is yours if you want her," Quentin said. Katherine turned to look at him, her eyes wide. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you need a horse," Quentin said simply. He turned to Sam. "How much?" They haggled briefly before settling on a price that was more than fair. Quentin paid, and Sam threw in a used saddle and bridle that had seen better days but were still serviceable. Katherine saddled the mare herself, her movements quick and confident, and Quentin found himself wondering about her story, about the life she had lived before ending up on that platform. They rode out of Wheatland side by side as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The town fell away behind them, replaced by rolling grassland that stretched toward distant mountains. Quentin kept the pace easy, mindful of the pack mule, and the fact that Katherine's mare was still getting used to her new rider. They rode in silence for the first hour, and Quentin did not push for conversation. He could feel Katherine watching him from the corner of her eye, still trying to figure out what kind of man he was, what he wanted from her. When the sun reached its zenith, they stopped near a creek to water the horses and rest for a few minutes. Quentin pulled out some jerky and hardtack from his saddlebag and offered half to Katherine. She took it without comment, and they sat on opposite sides of a cottonwood tree, eating in silence. Finally, Katherine spoke. "What do you expect from me?" Quentin considered the question. "At the ranch, I have 2 hired hands, men I trust. We raise cattle and horses, and there is always work to be done. I could use help with cooking and managing the house if you are willing. Beyond that, I expect honesty and hard work, same as I give." "That is all." Katherine's voice was sharp with disbelief. Quentin met her eyes. "That is all. You paid $500 for me." "I paid $500 to get you off that platform before Pike did," Quentin corrected. "There is a difference." Katherine stood abruptly, pacing to the edge of the creek. Her shoulders were rigid with tension. "I do not understand you. Men do not do things like that without wanting something in return." Quentin stood as well, but he kept his distance, giving her space. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out the folded bill of sale. Katherine watched him with wary eyes as he walked to the creek's edge. Then, without a word, he pulled out a match, struck it against his belt buckle, and held the flame to the corner of the paper. The bill of sale caught fire quickly, the edges curling and blackening as the flames consumed the words that claimed ownership of another human being. Quentin held it until the fire nearly reached his fingers, then dropped it into the creek where it hissed and disintegrated into ash that floated away on the current. "You are free," Quentin said quietly. "You can take that mare and ride anywhere you want. I will not stop you. If you choose to come to the ranch, it will be because you want to, not because a piece of paper says you have to." Katherine stared at the place where the bill of sale had disappeared, her face pale. "I have no money, no family, nowhere to go." "Then come to the ranch," Quentin said. "Stay as long as you want. Leave when you are ready. The choice is yours." For a long moment, Katherine said nothing. Then she turned to face him fully, and there were tears standing in her eyes, though her voice remained steady. "Why?" "Because nobody should be owned," Quentin said. "And because you reminded me of a wild horse I once knew. Some things are not meant to be broken." Katherine wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, a quick, angry gesture, as though furious at herself for showing weakness. "I do not cry," she said fiercely. "Everyone cries sometimes," Quentin said. "Nothing wrong with it. I have not cried since the raiders came, since they killed my parents and my brother, since they burned our wagon and left me with nothing. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with grief and rage. Quentin felt the weight of them, understood the enormity of what she had lost. He had seen enough death during the war to know that some wounds never fully healed, you just learn to carry them. "I am sorry," he said, and meant it. Katherine drew in a shaky breath. "I will come to your ranch. Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because I think you might actually mean what you say. If I am wrong, if you turn out to be like the others, I will kill you in your sleep and take everything you own." Quentin could not help it. He laughed, a short bark of genuine amusement. "That is fair." And noted. The corner of Katherine's mouth twitched, not quite a smile but close. It transformed her face for just a moment, softening the hard edges and giving him a glimpse of who she might have been before loss and fear had carved themselves into her bones. They mounted their horses and continued riding. As they traveled, Katherine began to relax incrementally, her shoulders losing some of their rigidity, her hands easier on the reins. Quentin pointed out landmarks, explaining the boundaries of his property as they crossed onto his land. The ranch house came into view as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, a sturdy log structure with a covered porch and a chimney made of river stone. There was a barn, a corral with several horses, and a bunkhouse where his hired hands stayed. Two men emerged from the barn as they approached. The first was Thomas Webb, a grizzled veteran who had served in the same regiment as Quentin during the war. He was in his 50s, with gray threading through his beard and eyes that had seen too much but still held kindness. The second was younger, barely 20, a Mexican man named Miguel Santos who had drifted north looking for work and proven himself invaluable with the horses. Both men stopped short when they saw Katherine, their expressions carefully neutral. Quentin dismounted and helped Katherine down, though she clearly did not need the assistance. "Thomas, Miguel, this is Katherine Calloway," Quentin said. "She will be staying at the ranch, helping out with the house and cooking. Katherine, these are my hands, Thomas and Miguel." Thomas touched the brim of his hat. "Madam." Miguel nodded, his dark eyes curious but respectful. "Welcome, Miss Calloway." Katherine looked between them, then at Quentin, as though still waiting for the other shoe to drop. When nothing happened, when the men simply went back to their work after exchanging a few words with Quentin about the day's tasks, she seemed to relax a fraction more. Quentin led her into the house. It was not fancy, but it was clean and well-maintained. There was a main room with a fireplace, a kitchen area with a cast-iron stove, and two bedrooms. One of the bedrooms had clearly been used for storage, filled with crates and various ranch equipment. "I will clear this out tomorrow," Quentin said, gesturing to the cluttered room. "For tonight you can have my room. I will sleep out here by the fire." "I can take the couch," Katherine protested. "You have had a long day. Take the bed." Quentin's tone left no room for argument, but it was not unkind. "There are clean clothes in the trunk at the foot of the bed. They belonged to my mother. She passed 3 years ago, but I kept some of her things. You are about her size." Katherine's hand went to the faded fabric of her dress. "Thank you." Quentin nodded and left her to settle in. He went outside to help Thomas and Miguel finish the evening chores, feeding the horses and checking on the cattle in the near pasture. Thomas fell into step beside him as they walked to the barn. "You want to tell me what happened in town?" Thomas asked quietly. Quentin gave him the abbreviated version, watching his old friend's expression shift from surprise to understanding to approval. "You did right," Thomas said when he finished. "That girl has been through hell. Anyone can see it. She needs time and space to heal." "She needs to know she is safe," Quentin said. "Nothing more, nothing less." "You got feelings for her?" Thomas asked bluntly. Quentin paused, considering the question honestly. "I do not know her well enough to have feelings beyond basic human decency." but I would be lying if I said I was not drawn to her. There is something about her, Thomas, something strong and fierce and unbroken despite everything. Then be patient, Thomas advised. That kind of strength comes from having to survive things nobody should survive. She will not trust easy. I know. They finished the chores as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. When Quentin returned to the house, he found Katherine in the kitchen. She had changed into one of his mother's dresses, a simple brown calico that fit her reasonably well, and she was examining the contents of the pantry with a critical eye. "There is not much here for dinner," she said without preamble, "but I can make something with what you have." "Do Thomas and Miguel eat with you?" "Usually," Quentin said, "unless they have other plans." Katherine nodded and set to work. Quentin watched as she moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, building a fire in the stove, mixing ingredients for biscuits, slicing salt pork to fry. Her movements were quick and sure, the movements of someone who had cooked many meals under far less comfortable circumstances. When Thomas and Miguel came in, they washed up at the basin near the door and took seats at the table. Quentin had worried that Katherine might feel overwhelmed or uncomfortable, but she seemed to take the presence of the other men in stride. She served the meal without comment: fried pork, biscuits, beans, and coffee so strong it could strip paint. "This is real good, Miss Calloway," Miguel said after his first bite. "Best biscuits I have had in months." Katherine gave him a small nod of acknowledgement. They ate in companionable silence, broken only by occasional comments about the ranch work or the weather. Quentin noticed that Katherine ate slowly, as though savoring each bite, and he wondered how long it had been since she had eaten a full meal. After dinner, Thomas and Miguel returned to the bunkhouse. Quentin helped Katherine clean up, and she did not protest his assistance. As they worked side by side, washing dishes in a basin of heated water, Quentin felt the strangeness of the situation settle over him. This morning, he had been alone. Tonight, there was a woman in his house, a woman whose life he had purchased and then set free, and he had no idea what tomorrow would bring. "I want to make something clear," Katherine said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her hands stilled in the dishwater. "I am grateful for what you did today. More grateful than I can express, but I do not want your pity." "I do not pity you," Quentin said honestly. "I respect you." Katherine turned to look at him, searching his face. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her because she nodded and returned to washing dishes. That night, Quentin lay on the couch near the fireplace, listening to the house settle around him. He could hear the faint sounds of Katherine moving in the bedroom, the creak of the bed frame as she lay down. He wondered if she would sleep or if the nightmares would come for her. He wondered if she would be there in the morning or if she would take the mare and disappear into the vast Wyoming landscape. When he woke the next morning, the smell of coffee and frying bacon greeted him. Katherine was already up, dressed in another of his mother's dresses, her hair braided back from her face. She handed him a cup of coffee without a word, and Quentin took it as the answer to his unspoken question. She had stayed. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Katherine took over the running of the house with fierce efficiency, cooking, cleaning, mending clothes, and managing 1,000 small tasks that Quentin had been handling himself with varying degrees of success. But she did not confine herself to the house. She helped with the horses, revealing a natural talent with the animals that impressed even Miguel. She learned to ride fence lines with Quentin, checking for breaks and weak spots. She was not afraid of hard work, and she never complained, but she also did not let anyone get too close. She was polite to Thomas and Miguel, friendly even, but there was a wall around her that she refused to let down. With Quentin, she was cautiously cordial but nothing more. They worked together, ate together, lived in the same house, but they remained essentially strangers. Quentin did not push. He gave her space, respected her boundaries, and waited. Thomas had been right. Katherine needed time. 3 weeks after Katherine arrived at the ranch, a storm rolled in from the north. It started as a distant rumble of thunder and ended with sheets of rain that turned the world gray and sent everyone scrambling for cover. Quentin and Katherine were caught halfway between the north pasture and the house, and by the time they made it to the barn, they were both soaked to the skin. Lightning flashed, illuminating the barn's interior in stark white bursts. Thunder followed, so loud it seemed to shake the ground. Quentin grabbed horse blankets from a shelf and handed one to Katherine. She wrapped it around her shoulders, shivering as water dripped from her hair. "That came up fast," Quentin said, wringing water from his hat. Katherine did not respond. She was staring at the barn door, her face pale, her breathing rapid. Another flash of lightning lit up the barn, and Quentin saw her flinch. "Katherine," she did not seem to hear him. Her hands were clenched in the blanket, her whole body trembling. Quentin moved closer, careful not to startle her. "Katherine, what is wrong?" "The storm," she whispered. "The night the raiders came, there was a storm like this. Lightning and thunder and rain. We could not see them coming until they were right on us. My father tried to fight them off, but there were too many. They shot him first, then my brother when he tried to run. My mother, they—" Her voice broke. The lightning kept flashing, and I could see everything, every terrible thing. Quentin's heart clenched. Without thinking, he reached out and gently took her hand. She gripped his fingers with desperate strength, holding on as though he were the only solid thing in a world that had gone mad. "You are safe," Quentin said quietly. "I promise you, Katherine, you are safe here." Another crack of thunder, and Katherine made a small, broken sound. Quentin did the only thing he could think of. He pulled her into his arms, wrapping the blanket and his embrace around her trembling form. For a moment she resisted, her body going rigid, but then something broke inside her. She buried her face against his chest and finally, let herself cry. The sobs came from somewhere deep inside her, wrenching and painful, the accumulated grief of months of horror and loss. Quentin held her through it, one hand stroking her wet hair, murmuring wordless comfort. The storm raged outside, but inside the barn, Katherine Calloway allowed herself to be vulnerable for the first time since her world had been destroyed. When the tears finally subsided, Katherine pulled back, wiping at her face with shaking hands. "I am sorry," she said, her voice rough. "Do not be," Quentin said. "You have nothing to apologize for." Katherine looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed but clearer than he had seen them. "Why are you so kind to me?" "Because you deserve kindness," Quentin said simply. "And because I know what it is like to carry ghosts. The war." Yes, Quentin had not talked about it much, but something in this moment called for honesty. "I saw men die, good men, friends. I did things I am not proud of because I was ordered to do them. When it was over, I came west to get away from those memories, but they followed me. For a long time, I thought I did not deserve peace or happiness or any of the good things in life. I was wrong. We all deserve those things, Katherine, even when we cannot see it ourselves." Katherine reached up and touched his face, her fingertips gentle against his bearded cheek. It was the first time she had initiated physical contact, and Quentin went very still, afraid to break the moment. "I think you are a good man, Quentin Harper," she said softly. "Maybe the best man I have ever known." "I am just a man," Quentin said, his voice rough. "But I am trying to be a good one." The storm passed eventually, leaving the world washed clean and smelling of wet earth. Quentin and Katherine walked back to the house together, not touching but closer than they had been before. Something had shifted between them in that barn. Some wall had come down, and Quentin felt the change like the warmth of sunlight after a long winter. In the weeks that followed, Katherine began to smile more. Not often, but enough that Quentin found himself working for those smiles, saying things or doing things that might coax that transformation of her features. She laughed one afternoon when one of the barn cats got tangled in yarn she was using to mend socks, a bright, genuine sound that made everyone within earshot stop and stare, because it was so unexpected and so welcome. Thomas and Miguel noticed the change too. "She is healing," Thomas told Quentin one evening as they repaired a section of fence. "Thanks to you. She is healing because she is strong," Quentin corrected. "I just gave her a safe place to do it." "You gave her more than that," Thomas said. "But I reckon you will figure that out in your own time." Quentin thought about Thomas's words as he lay on his couch that night, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere along the way, his feelings for Katherine had shifted from protective concern to something deeper and more complicated. He looked forward to seeing her in the mornings, to working beside her during the day, to sitting across from her at dinner, and watching the way the lamplight played across her features. He wanted to hear her laugh again, wanted to see her smile, wanted to know everything about her, every story and scar and secret dream. He was falling in love with her, and he had no idea what to do about it. Summer deepened into the full heat of July. The cattle grazed on the grasslands, growing fat, and the horses they were raising showed promise. Quentin spent long days in the saddle, checking fence lines and water sources, and Katherine often rode with him. She had proven herself capable with a rifle, shooting at tin cans Quentin set up for target practice, and he felt better knowing she could defend herself if needed. One afternoon, they were riding back from checking on the cattle in the eastern pasture when Katherine pulled her mare to a stop on a rise overlooking the ranch. Quentin stopped beside her, following her gaze to the house and barn below, the mountains rising in the distance, the endless sky overhead. "I never thought I would feel at home anywhere again," Katherine said quietly. "After my family died, I felt like I was just drifting, like I did not belong anywhere or to anyone. But here, on this ranch, I feel like maybe I could build a new life. Like maybe the person I was before is not completely lost." "She is not lost," Quentin said. "She is just different now. Stronger, maybe, more aware of how precious life is." Katherine turned to look at him, and the expression on her face made Quentin's breath catch. "You have given me that, Quentin. You have given me hope when I thought I had none left." "Katherine," Quentin said, and then stopped, unsure how to continue. The words he wanted to say felt too big, too important, and he was afraid of saying them wrong. "What?" Katherine asked, her dark eyes searching his face. "I need you to know that you can stay here as long as you want," Quentin said carefully. "This is your home now if you want it to be. Not because you work here, not because you feel obligated, but because I want you here. I want to see you every day. I want to hear you laugh and watch you work with the horses and sit across from you at dinner. I want—" He trailed off, then made himself finish. "I want you to be happy. That is all I want." Katherine's eyes had gone very wide. "Quentin, are you saying—" "I am saying that somewhere along the way I fell in love with you," Quentin said, the words coming easier now that he had started. "I did not plan it, did not expect it, but there it is. I love you, Katherine Calloway. I love your strength and your courage and your fierce heart. I love the way you refuse to be broken even when the world did its best to break you. And if you do not feel the same way, that is fine. Nothing has to change, but I needed you to know." For a long moment, Katherine said nothing. Then she dismounted from her mare in a fluid motion and walked over to Quentin. He swung down from Ash, his heart pounding, and met her halfway. Katherine reached up and pulled him down into a kiss that was fierce and tender and full of all the words neither of them quite knew how to say. When they finally broke apart, Katherine kept her hands fisted in his shirt, holding him close. "I was afraid," she said, her voice shaking. "Afraid to let myself feel anything for you because I thought if I let you in, something terrible would happen and I would lose you too. But I cannot keep living in fear. I do not want to. And the truth is, Quentin Harper, I love you too. I think I have loved you since the moment you burned that bill of sale and set me free." Quentin cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had started to fall. "Then we will face whatever comes together. I cannot promise that nothing bad will ever happen, but I can promise that I will be beside you through all of it." "That is all I need," Katherine said, and kissed him again. They rode back to the ranch hand in hand, a feat of horsemanship that was probably foolish but felt necessary. When they arrived, Thomas took one look at their faces and grinned. "About damn time," he said, and Miguel laughed. That night, they celebrated with a dinner that turned into an impromptu party. Thomas produced a bottle of whiskey he had been saving, and Miguel played guitar, singing songs in Spanish that made Katherine laugh even though she did not understand all the words. They sat on the porch as the sun set, and Quentin held Katherine's hand, marveling at how different his life looked now from just a few months ago. The next weeks were among the happiest of Quentin's life. He and Katherine were courting in earnest now, though courting seemed like too tame a word for the connection between them. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their pasts, their dreams for the future. Katherine told him about growing up in Pennsylvania, about her family's decision to head west for a new start, about the journey that had ended in tragedy. Quentin told her about the war, about the battles and the losses, about the long road to finding peace with what he had done and seen. They also learned each other in other ways. Quentin discovered that Katherine sang while she worked, soft melodies that filled the house with warmth. Katherine learned that Quentin talked to the horses when he thought no one was listening, telling them his worries and hopes. They stole kisses in the barn, held hands under the dinner table, and fell asleep on the porch swing watching the stars wheel overhead. In late August, Quentin asked Katherine to marry him. He did it without fanfare, one evening as they sat by the creek watching the water flow past. He had been planning something more elaborate, something worthy of the moment, but the words just came out. "Marry me," he said. Katherine turned to look at him, her eyes wide. "What? Marry me?" Quentin repeated, more certain now. "I know we have not been together long by conventional standards, but I know my own heart. I love you, Katherine. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to build a future together, raise a family if you want that, grow old watching the seasons change on this land. Will you marry me?" Katherine did not answer with words. She launched herself at him, knocking them both backward onto the grass, and kissed him with enough passion to leave no doubt about her answer. When she finally pulled back, she was laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes," she said. "Yes, yes, yes. I will marry you, Quentin Harper." They were married in September, just as the leaves began to turn gold. The ceremony was small, held at the ranch with Thomas and Miguel as witnesses and a circuit preacher performing the service. Katherine wore a dress that Quentin had ordered from a dressmaker in Cheyenne, pale blue silk that made her eyes look like the sky at twilight. Quentin wore his best suit, the one he had not touched since coming west, and tried not to shake as he said his vows. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Quentin kissed Katherine with all the love in his heart, and the small assembled group cheered. They celebrated with a feast that Katherine and Thomas had been preparing for days. Tables laden with roasted beef, potatoes, fresh bread, pies, and every good thing they could manage. Neighbors from surrounding ranches had been invited, and the party lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and laughter. Finally, as the moon rose high overhead and the guests began to depart, Quentin and Katherine slipped away to the house. Quentin had moved his things into the storage room weeks ago, giving Katherine the main bedroom, but tonight they would share it as husband and wife. They took their time, learning each other with gentle touches and whispered words. Katherine had been afraid, Quentin knew, afraid that this part of marriage would be something forced and frightening like the stories she had heard from other women. But Quentin was patient and tender, and Katherine discovered that love transformed everything, made even vulnerability feel like a gift rather than a surrender. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the moonlight streaming through the window, and Katherine traced patterns on Quentin's chest with her fingertips. "I never thought I could be this happy," she said softly. "After everything that happened, I thought happiness was something I would never feel again." "You deserve all the happiness in the world," Quentin said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "And I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to give it to you." "You already have," Katherine said. "Just by being yourself, just by seeing me as a person worth saving instead of a possession to own." "You were never something to own," Quentin said fiercely. "You are a force of nature, Katherine Harper. You are thunder and lightning and wild open spaces." "I am just lucky you chose to share your life with me," Katherine smiled against his skin. "I like the sound of that, Katherine Harper. It feels right." The winter that followed was cold but good. Snow blanketed the ranch, and they spent long evenings by the fire while the wind howled outside. Quentin taught Katherine to play chess, and she proved to be a quick study, winning more often than not after the first few weeks. They read books together, huddled under quilts, and talked about their plans for the spring. Katherine had ideas for the ranch, ways to improve and expand. She wanted to start a garden, grow vegetables to supplement their diet and sell at market. She thought they could raise chickens for eggs, maybe even a few pigs. Quentin listened to her plans with growing excitement, seeing the ranch through her eyes, seeing all the possibilities he had been too cautious to pursue alone. In February, Katherine told him she was pregnant. They were in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner, when she suddenly stopped and put a hand to her stomach. Quentin looked up from the dish he was drying and saw the wonder on her face. "Katherine, what is it?" "I think I am with child," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have been feeling strange for a few weeks, and my monthly courses have not come. I think we are going to have a baby, Quentin." Quentin dropped the dish. It clattered into the basin, splashing water, but he did not care. He crossed to Katherine in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." Katherine laughed, the sound bright with joy and a little edged with fear. "Are you happy?" "Happy." Quentin pulled back to look at her, cupping her face in his hands. "Katherine, I am beyond happy. I am terrified and thrilled and so full of love I feel like I might burst. You are giving me everything I never knew I wanted." "We are giving it to each other," Katherine corrected, placing her hands over his. "And I am terrified too, but I think that is normal." "We will figure it out together," Quentin promised, "just like we have figured out everything else." The news seemed to transform the winter into something magical. Quentin became almost comically protective, insisting Katherine rest more, not lift anything heavy, bundle up warm whenever she went outside. Katherine tolerated his hovering with good-natured exasperation, reminding him that women had been having babies since the dawn of time, and she was not made of glass. Spring arrived with a rush of green, and the sound of newborn calves bawling for their mothers. Catherine's belly began to swell with the growing baby, and Quentin would often wake in the night to find himself talking to it, his hand pressed against Catherine's skin, telling their unborn child stories about the ranch and the mountains and all the wonders waiting in the world. Thomas and Miguel were delighted by the news, and both men became almost as protective as Quentin. Miguel carved a beautiful cradle from pine, sanding it smooth and decorating it with intricate designs. Thomas, gruff and practical, nonetheless spent hours knitting tiny socks and caps, a skill he had learned from his late wife. In early October, as the aspen trees turned to gold and the air carried the first chill of winter, Catherine's labor began. It was evening, and they had just finished dinner when Katherine gasped and grabbed the edge of the table. "Quentin, I think it is time." The next 20 hours were the longest of Quentin's life. He had sent Miguel racing for the midwife who lived 10 miles south, a sturdy woman named Mrs. Patterson, who had delivered half the babies in the territory. Thomas stayed with Quentin, keeping him calm when he wanted to pace holes in the floor, reminding him to breathe when he heard Katherine cry out. Finally, in the gray light of dawn, a baby's wail pierced the air. Mrs. Patterson emerged from the bedroom, exhausted but smiling. "You have a daughter, Mr. Harper, healthy and strong just like her mother." Quentin barely heard the rest. He was already moving past her into the room where Katherine lay propped up on pillows, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, her face exhausted but radiant. And in her arms, wrapped in one of the blankets Thomas had knitted, was the most beautiful thing Quentin had ever seen. His daughter had a cap of dark hair and Catherine's eyes, and she was staring up at her mother with the solemn intensity of someone taking in the world for the first time. Quentin sank down onto the edge of the bed, his legs suddenly unsteady, and reached out to touch the baby's impossibly small hand. She gripped his finger with surprising strength, and Quentin felt his heart crack open in a way he had not known was possible. "She is perfect," he whispered. "She is ours," Katherine said, looking up at him with eyes that held the whole universe. "Ours, Quentin, can you believe it?" "What should we name her?" Quentin asked. Katherine looked down at their daughter, considering. "Rose," she said finally. "Rose Katherine Harper, after my mother." "Rose," Quentin repeated, testing the name. "It is perfect. She is perfect. You are perfect." Katherine laughed weakly. "I am a mess and you know it, but I have never been happier." The months that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and infinite wonder. Rose proved to be a healthy baby with a powerful set of lungs and her mother's stubborn will. Quentin discovered that he could function on far less sleep than he had thought possible, and that the sight of his daughter's smile could erase any amount of exhaustion. Katherine took to motherhood with the same fierce determination she brought to everything. She nursed Rose, sang to her, walked the floors with her when she fussed, and guarded her with the protectiveness of a she-wolf. Watching her with their daughter, Quentin fell in love with her all over again. The ranch prospered. Catherine's garden grew abundant in the summer heat, and her chickens provided eggs to sell at market along with their cattle. They hired another hand to help with the increased work, a young cowboy named Samuel who proved reliable and hardworking. The ranch that had once been Quentin's solitary refuge had become a true home, filled with love and laughter and the chaos of daily life. Rose grew quickly, as babies do. She took her first steps just before her first birthday, wobbling across the porch into Quentin's waiting arms. Her first word was "Dada," which made Quentin insufferably proud until her second word was "Mama," and Katherine gave him a very satisfied look. By the time she was 2, Rose was following Quentin and Miguel around the ranch like a tiny shadow, her dark curls bouncing as she chased chickens and tried to pet horses twice her size. One evening, when Rose was 3, Quentin found Katherine standing on the porch watching the sunset. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned back against him with a contented sigh. "You ever think about that day in Wheatland?" Katherine asked softly. "About how different our lives could have been?" "Sometimes," Quentin admitted. "Usually to thank God that things turned out the way they did." "I think about it often," Katherine said. "I think about standing on that platform, feeling like my life was over, like I had lost everything that mattered, and then you appeared. My unlikely hero with your ridiculous bid and your kind eyes. You gave me back my life, Quentin. You gave me a future I never thought I would have." "You gave me the same," Quentin said, tightening his arms around her. "I was just existing before you came. Going through the motions, working the ranch, but not really living. You and Rose, you are my life now, you are everything." Katherine turned in his arms to face him. "I want more," she said. "More what?" "More children," Katherine said, her eyes bright. "More life. More everything. I want this house filled with children and noise and chaos. I want to grow old with you, Quentin, surrounded by the family we built together." Quentin kissed her, slow and deep and full of promise. "Then that is what we will do," he said. "As many children as you want, as many years as we are given." "All of it, Katherine, everything." And that was exactly what they did. Over the next 8 years, Katherine gave birth to 3 more children, 2 boys and another girl. The ranch house, once so quiet, rang with the sounds of children playing, arguing, laughing. Thomas and Miguel became honorary uncles, teaching the children to ride and rope, and all the skills they would need to thrive in the Wyoming territory. Quentin expanded the ranch, buying up adjacent land as it became available. They built a larger house with enough rooms for their growing family, though Katherine insisted on keeping the original house as well, using it for guests or hired hands. The ranch became known throughout the territory as one of the most successful operations in the region. But more than that, it became known as a place of kindness and opportunity. Quentin and Katherine made it a policy to hire anyone willing to work hard, regardless of their background, and more than one drifter found a home and a purpose on the Harper Ranch. The years brought challenges as well as joys. There were harsh winters that killed cattle, dry summers that turned the grass brown, illnesses that swept through despite the best medical care available. But Quentin and Katherine faced it all together, their love deepening with each trial overcome, each crisis weathered. Rose grew into a young woman with her mother's beauty and her father's steady temperament. She could ride like the wind, shoot like a marksman, and rope a steer as well as any of the ranch hands. She also inherited her mother's business sense, taking over much of the ranch's bookkeeping and correspondence by the time she was 16. The boys, James and William, were as different as night and day. James was serious and thoughtful, interested in the business side of ranching and talking about maybe becoming a lawyer someday. William was wild and impulsive, happiest on horseback with the wind in his face, dreaming of exploring the frontier. The youngest, Emma, was only 8 but already showing signs of being the most stubborn of all the Harper children, a feat that made both Quentin and Katherine laugh and despair in equal measure. On a golden afternoon in late September, almost 20 years after Quentin had stood in that market square in Wheatland, he found himself on the porch once again watching the sunset. Katherine sat beside him, her hand in his, her hair now shot through with strands of silver. The sounds of their children drifted from various parts of the ranch, Rose calling instructions to a new ranch hand, the boys arguing about something near the barn, Emma singing off-key in the garden. "Did you ever imagine this?" Katherine asked, echoing a question she had asked him years before. "All of this? Not in my wildest dreams," Quentin admitted. "When I saw you on that platform, all I wanted was to get you away from there, to give you a chance at freedom. I never imagined it would lead to this, to us, to all of this." He gestured at the ranch, at the life they had built. "You gave me more than freedom," Katherine said. "You gave me a home, a family, a reason to keep going when I thought I had none. You gave me love, Quentin, and that made all the difference." "We gave it to each other," Quentin said, repeating words Katherine had once said to him. "And we built this life together, piece by piece." Katherine leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. Quentin thought about the long road that had brought them here, all the choices and chances that had led to this moment. He thought about the war and the losses that had driven him west. He thought about Katherine's tragedy and the series of events that had put her on that platform. And he thought about his decision to raise his hand, to pay that outrageous sum, to burn the bill of sale and set her free. It had been the best decision of his life. Thomas emerged from the barn, walking with a more pronounced limp these days, but still working, still a vital part of the ranch. He raised a hand in greeting, and Quentin returned it. Miguel was in the corral with James, working with a new horse, their voices carrying on the evening air. This was family, Quentin thought, not just blood but choice. People who had come together from different places and different circumstances to build something lasting. "We did good, didn't we?" Katherine asked softly. "We did better than good," Quentin said. "We created something beautiful." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Rose came to fetch them for dinner. She had grown into a woman who reminded Quentin of Katherine in so many ways, strong and capable and kind. She had suitors, young men from neighboring ranches who came calling with increasing frequency. But so far she had shown no interest in settling down. She had plans of her own, dreams that extended beyond marriage and children, and Quentin supported her completely. The world was changing, and he wanted his daughters to have every opportunity to shape their own futures, just as Katherine had shaped hers. Dinner was the usual cheerful chaos, with everyone talking over each other, sharing stories of their day. Katherine had made Quentin's favorite meal, pot roast with vegetables from their garden, and the bread was fresh from the oven. As Quentin looked around the table at his family, at the faces he loved more than life itself, he felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. This was what mattered. Not the size of the ranch or the number of cattle they ran or the profits they turned. This, right here, these people and the love they shared. This was the measure of a life well lived. After dinner, after the children had scattered to their various evening activities and the dishes were washed, Quentin and Katherine walked out to the place where he had proposed, down by the creek where the water burbled over smooth stones. The moon was rising, casting silver light across the landscape, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. "You have any regrets?" Quentin asked Katherine. She was quiet for a moment, considering. "Only one," she said finally. "I wish I could go back and tell that terrified girl on the platform that everything was going to be okay. That the man raising his hand was going to save her in every way a person can be saved. That she was going to find love and happiness and a family beyond her wildest dreams. That the life ahead of her was going to be so much better than the one she lost." Quentin pulled Katherine into his arms, holding her close. "Maybe she knew," he said. "Maybe some part of her looked at me and knew even then that everything was going to be okay." "Maybe," Katherine agreed. She tilted her face up to kiss him, the kiss of two people who had spent decades learning each other, who knew every scar and secret and still chose each other every single day. "I love you, Quentin Harper. I loved you then, I love you now, and I will love you until my dying breath." "And I love you, Katherine Harper," Quentin said. From that first moment I saw you, fierce and unbroken until the end of time." They stood there by the creek, wrapped in each other's arms under the Wyoming stars, two souls who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built a life together out of ashes and hope. The ranch stretched out around them, the home they had created, the legacy they would pass down to their children and grandchildren. It was not perfect, but it was theirs, built on love and freedom and the unshakable belief that every person deserved dignity and choice. And as the night deepened and they walked back to the house hand in hand, Quentin thought about that day in Wheatland one more time. He thought about the man he had been, lonely and haunted, going through the motions of living without really living at all. He thought about the $500 he had paid, a fortune to most men, and knew that it had been the best investment he had ever made. Not because he had bought a woman, but because he had freed one. And in freeing Katherine, he had somehow freed himself. The house was warm and welcoming when they entered. Emma was already asleep, curled up in her bed with a doll clutched in her arms. The boys were in their room, William reading by lamplight while James sketched something in a notebook. Rose was on the porch still, looking up at the stars, dreaming whatever dreams young women dreamed. Quentin and Katherine went to their bedroom, the room they had shared for nearly 20 years. They got ready for bed with the easy familiarity of long practice, and when they lay down together, Katherine's head on Quentin's shoulder, his arm around her waist, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "What are you thinking about?" Katherine asked sleepily. "About how lucky I am," Quentin said. "About how that one decision, that one moment of choosing to do the right thing led to all of this. About how grateful I am that you chose to trust me." "You made it easy to trust you," Katherine said. "You burned the bill of sale. You set me free." "What woman would not fall in love with a man like that?" "I think you are giving me too much credit," Quentin said with a smile. "I think I am giving you exactly the right amount," Katherine countered. She yawned, snuggling closer. "Good night, my love." "Good night, Katherine." Quentin lay awake for a while longer, listening to Katherine's breathing even out into sleep, listening to the house settle around them. He thought about the future, about watching his children grow and start families of their own, about becoming a grandfather someday, about growing old with the woman he loved. He thought about all the possibilities that lay ahead, and he felt nothing but anticipation and joy. The story of how they met, of the cowboy who bought the last woman at market and then burned the bill of sale and set her free, had become something of a legend in the territory. People told it with embellishments and additions, some true, some fanciful. But the heart of the story remained the same, a tale of compassion and courage and love finding a way even in the hardest of circumstances. And that was the legacy Quentin wanted to leave behind, not just the ranch or the material success, but the knowledge that he had tried to live a good life, to treat people with dignity, to love deeply and well. He had not been perfect. He had made mistakes, had moments of doubt and fear and anger. But he had tried, and in the end, that was all any person could do. As sleep finally claimed him, Quentin's last conscious thought was of Katherine, of the way she had looked that first day, fierce and beautiful and unbowed. He had saved her, people said, but the truth was more complicated and more wonderful. They had saved each other, and together they had built a life worth living, a love worth fighting for, a home worth cherishing. In the morning, they would wake to a new day, to the demands of the ranch and the needs of their children, to all the small joys and challenges that made up a life. But for now, in this quiet moment, wrapped in darkness and dreams, there was only peace and contentment and the steady beating of two hearts that had found their way home. The years continued to turn, as years do. The children grew, and eventually left to pursue their own paths, though they all remained close, returning often to the ranch that would always be home. Rose married a young lawyer from Cheyenne, a man who respected her intelligence and supported her ambitions. They gave Quentin and Katherine their first grandchildren, twin boys who were as wild as their Uncle William had been. James took over more of the ranch operations, proving to have a keen mind for business and a gift for dealing with the challenges of a changing West. William did indeed become an explorer of sorts, working as a scout and guide throughout the territories, before finally settling down with a Shoshone woman he met on his travels. Emma became a teacher, opening a school on the ranch property that served children from the surrounding area. Through it all, Quentin and Katherine remained the steady center, the heart of the family. They grew older gracefully, their hair turning silver, their steps slowing, but their love never diminishing. They still held hands when they walked, still stole kisses in the barn, still sat on the porch watching sunsets and talking about everything and nothing. When Quentin was 68 and Katherine was 60, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together family and friends from across the territory. The original ranch house, lovingly maintained, was decorated with flowers from Katherine's garden. Tables groaned under the weight of food prepared by 3 generations of Harper family cooks. There was music and dancing and storytelling, tales both true and embellished about the legendary cowboy who had freed his bride and the fierce woman who had tamed his heart. Quentin danced with Katherine as the sun set, holding her close and moving slowly to the music. Her hair was white now, and the lines on her face told the story of a life fully lived, but to him, she was as beautiful as the day he had first seen her. More beautiful because now he knew every facet of her, every strength and vulnerability, every dream and fear. 40 years, Katherine marveled. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like we just started. It has been the best 40 years of my life, Quentin said. And if I had it to do over, I would not change a single thing. Not even the hard parts, Katherine asked. The times we fought or struggled or doubted, especially not those, Quentin said. Those parts made us stronger. They taught us how to weather storms together. Without them, we would not be who we are now. Katherine smiled up at him, her eyes still bright despite the years. You always know the right thing to say. I've had a lot of practice, Quentin said, spinning her gently, and a very good teacher. As the party continued around them, as their children and grandchildren celebrated, Quentin felt a wave of emotion so strong it nearly brought him to his knees. This was his life, the life he had built from one impulsive decision and years of love and hard work. This was his legacy. These people, this love, this family that stretched out like roots from a mighty tree, and at the center of it all was Katherine, his wife, his partner, his best friend, the woman who had changed everything. She had been worth every penny of that $500 and infinitely more. She had been worth fighting for, worth building a life for, worth growing old beside. That night, after the guests had departed and the family had scattered to their various beds and homes, Quentin and Katherine sat on their porch one more time. The moon was full, bathing the ranch in silver light, and the air was soft with the promise of autumn. "Thank you," Katherine said softly. "For what?" Quentin asked. "For seeing me that day. For choosing to act when others would have walked away. For giving me a life beyond my wildest dreams. For loving me so well for so long." Katherine took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "For everything, Quentin, thank you for everything." Quentin brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "The privilege has been entirely mine, Katherine Harper. You have made me the luckiest man alive." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling for the night. And in that moment, Quentin knew with absolute certainty that every choice he had made, every risk he had taken, every moment of doubt and fear and struggle, had been worth it to arrive at this place, this moment, this life. He had bought the last woman at market all those years ago, then burned the bill of sale and set her free. And in doing so, he had found his own freedom, his own salvation, his own happy ending. They had built a life together on the foundation of that single act of kindness, a life filled with love and laughter, and the kind of deep, abiding joy that comes from choosing each other every single day. And as they finally rose from the porch and made their way to bed, walking slowly with the care of those who have earned their years, Quentin knew that this was what it meant to live well. Not to have a perfect life free of pain or struggle, but to have a life filled with love and purpose and meaning. To have someone to share it with, someone who knew your soul and loved you anyway. To build something lasting and pass it down to the next generation. The story that had begun on a dusty platform in Wheatland, Wyoming, in the summer of 1867, had become something beautiful and enduring. It was a story they would tell their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a story that would live on long after they were gone. But more than a story, it was a life, their life, and it had been magnificent. Quentin fell asleep that night with Katherine in his arms, just as he had for 40 years, and his dreams were peaceful and full of light. And if somewhere in those dreams, he saw a younger version of himself standing in a market square, making the decision that would change everything, he smiled and whispered a thank you to that younger man for having the courage to act, for having the compassion to care, for having the wisdom to know that some things were worth any price. The cowboy had bought the last woman at market, then burned the bill of sale and set her free. And in doing so, he had written the greatest love story the Wyoming Territory had ever known.